Hey everyone, welcome back to Kubrick Corner with me, Sean Wilson. So, Happy New Year. Welcome to 2020. Here's to another 12 months of excellent movies. And I'm kickstarting this year with a look at the new movie from Taika Waititi, which is called Jojo Rabbit. Waititi, you'll no doubt know, best known as the director of What We Do in the Shadows, Hunt for the Wilder People, Thor Ragnarok. Very quirky, offbeat New Zealand filmmaker who often mixes like riotously funny scenarios with often like poignant undercurrents. And now he returns with Jojo Rabbit, which is potentially his most ambitious film so far in terms of theme, if not necessarily in terms of scale. It's very loosely adapted from Christine Lunen's book Caging Skies, and it takes as its central subject the titular Jojo Betzler, brilliantly played by Golden Globe nominee Roman Griffin Davis, who is a real discovery, who is a kid in the Hitler Youth in these sort of final days of World War II, when the Allies are making incursions into Nazi Germany. He is sort of filled with nationalistic fervour, and he is guided in a kind of sort of perverse Jiminy Cricket kind of way by his imaginary friend, who happens to be a sort of cartoonish, bumbling Adolf Hitler, played by Waititi himself. And then Jodo discovers that his mother Rosie, played by Scarlett Johansson, is harbouring a young Jewish girl named Elsa, played by Thomasin McKenzie, in their attic. And he has to kind of make a moral choice about, does he give her up, or does he find some kind of inward compassion, and does he turn himself away from the sort of inner voice being provided to him by this Adolf Hitler. So it's interesting that I mentioned that in Waititi's movies that there is often a balance between sort of goofiness and poignancy. I mean, you look at something like, for example, Hunt for the Wilder People, which has got that brilliant dynamic between Sam Neill and Julian Dennison, which is very funny. But gradually, this chalk and cheese duo sort of form a bond with each other. And then also, one of the interesting things that Waititi does is it's about how sort of projected reality, how one's interpretation of reality is often undercut by the nature of reality itself. One need think of something like Boy, which is a very overlooked film of his from 2010 before he made it big in Hollywood. Boy was about a teenager who had built up an image of his absentee father as sort of virtuous, heroic figure. Only when the father comes back, the father played by Waititi, the father is abusive and horrible. And it's all of that, and that is a theme that very much runs into Jojo Rabbit, albeit playing out against the backdrop of the Hitler Youth and the Holocaust and World War II. And what you get is it's an interesting method of identification, which is that the entire film is obviously seen through Jojo's eyes. He's a young kid, he's innocent, he's naive, he can't grasp the interpretation of what the war is. He's got, obviously, from within Nazi Germany, he has no conception of the Holocaust. He is being sort of indoctrinated. There is this idea that the Jewish people have horns, that they smell of Brussels sprouts, and this is all it's a very sort of childish, naive interpretation of what is going on within Germany at that time. This feeds directly into the portrayal of Hitler, who is very much a gurning, oafish, childish figure. It's very much Hitler as imagined from a child's point of view. And I know I've read this film has generated very polarizing reviews. It won the audience award at the Toronto Film Festival, and yet critical reception has vacillated very wildly between people who've really admired the movie and then other people who've really hated it, who've given it 1-star reviews. I'm kind of in the middle. For one thing, I don't think that the movie's approach is in any way misconstrued or misconceived. I think that what the movie is doing, as I've said, is it's filtering the horrors of war through the very intentionally limited and rather twee and naive point of view of a young child who can't possibly comprehend what's going on around him. I mean, again, he thinks that this kind of nationalistic attitude is kind of the right thing, and then this manifests in the form of this imaginary Adolf Hitler. And I think that is an interesting approach. I don't necessarily have a problem with that. I mean, my problem isn't to do so much with the approach of the movie so much as maybe the execution of it. I think particularly in the first half, the scenes where you're in the Hitler Youth camp, and then you have other like Nazis introduced, played by the likes of Sam Rockwell, Alfie Allen and Rebel Wilson. it's actually only a couple of steps away from a lower low. I think I thought found for much of the first half of the movie, I found the comedy was kind of unfunny and broad and a bit gurning. And again, it kind of felt like a lower low with a university degree. And I kind of thought, okay, when is this actually going to start getting satirical? Because satire needs to cut deep. It's not simply enough to kind of make a pretense of being funny. Satire actually needs to make a point. And I was kind of thinking throughout the first half of the movie, okay, when is this actually going to start doing something other than kind of like flailing around, under the pretense of being kind of daring and applying a comedic aspect to World War II. And then I think finally in the second half of the movie does actually find substance. It starts to get darker. Things start to happen to Jojo that do actually have consequences, which start to steer the narrative in more of a sort of emotive direction. I think in the second half of the movie it picked up, and I think it's interesting that the bits of the movie that are more underplayed and are more serious are actually better than the kind of broader moments. And I think it's interesting that Waititi has taken a story, Lunan's novel, which I haven't read, but apparently is very, very serious-minded, and has decided to apply a surrealistic angle to it, which wasn't there in the source material. I do kind of wonder whether he's maybe more comfortable in that wheelhouse of making things silly, but then in the second half he kind of realised, okay, I really do need to knuckle down, and actually I need to start making the audience feel about what's going on. And I think that feeling only really comes across in the second half of the movie. I thought the first half of the movie was actually kind of annoying, despite the many strengths. Again, I think Roman Griffin Davis is really, really good as Jojo. It's a very complicated character, and it's a coming of age thing. The character has to start in one place as a certain kind of kid, and then he has to kind of come to some sort of mature realization despite his age at the end of the movie. But again, that is also kind of a problem, because what you've got is a sort of coming of age narrative, which also involves his sort of burgeoning friendship with Elsa, brilliantly played by Thomasin McKenzie. But the problem is, coming of age movies kind of start in one place and end in another place. They're kind of like fixed in terms of their narrative. But the problem is, when you try and fit the complexities of war within those two very fixed parameters, it kind of oversimplifies the complexity and the difficulty and the darkness of war. You kind of think, the effect of trying to mould a World War II narrative around a coming of age narrative is the effect of like distilling and boiling everything down, I think, to an oversimplified effect, which I think is a problem. However, I will say that I think clearly what the intention of the movie is, the intention is to introduce the spectre of World War II to audience members who are of Jojo's age. I imagine that is the primary register of the movie. And I have to say, if I'd watched this as a 12, 13-year-old as opposed to a 32-year-old, I probably would have responded to this movie very, very warmly. And I think that in an era when we are losing so many of our war veterans from like World War One and World War Two and other wars, I think the fact, if this movie keeps that message alive for younger audiences who are maybe just starting to grow up and to engage with that history, then I think fine. I think the movie's message and its approach is very admirable. I think the execution itself is very scattershot, often very twee and very naive and not altogether successful. It blunders around all over the place. I think it is Waititi's best movie. I mean, again, if you want to go back and look at that very, very tricky balancing act between fantasy and reality, go back to his 2010 film Boy, because I think it examines it in a much more sort of lucid way. As it stands, I think in Jojo Rabbit, he's kind of bitten off more than he can chew, but broadly speaking, I enjoyed it, and I think there is a lot to admire in it. I think Roman Griffin Davis and Scarlett Johansson and Thomasin McKenzie are great, and I would encourage people to go and see it, if only to foster, a discourse around what is already a very, very controversial movie. So it's called Jojo Rabbit. It's out now in the UK, and I'd love to hear your comments on the movie here at Kubrick Corner. Until next time, have a great new year, and I'll see you soon. Bye.